When I walked into this movie, I was not expecting to see a bunch of vampires doing an Irish jig. Like, that just was not on my bingo card for this film. Nor was I expecting it to be both creepy and haunting, but also very ethereal and very intriguing to watch. There's a lot of alchemy that's happening in this movie. This is obviously a very spiritual driven film, but there are just some scenes in here that really do pop off the screen and just feel very magical and just pulls you into it. And I do think that's a combination of the IMAX as well as the music and just the general flow and pacing of the editing. Like, Ryan Coogler really did some magic here with those Irish vampire jigs. Again, I was not expecting it. I didn't know that I needed that in my life. But again, while I was watching it, I was both very creeped out and very satisfied. So thank you, Ryan Coogler. Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. It has been a minute since I posted anything. April was a crazy month. I'm very glad that it's coming to an end. And I am back, at least for a couple of weeks anyway. And I know that everyone this weekend is probably talking about Until Dawn. I'll get to that at some point, but I was like, there is no way that I can go another week without seeing Sinners. Like, it just wasn't going to happen. Sinners, yes. That's it. That's the review right there. If you haven't seen this film yet, go out and watch it. This is one that you do need to go see in a theater, preferably in an IMAX experience, or at least the biggest screen that you can find. This will be a spoiler discussion on the film, just because it's hard to talk about all of the elements here without getting into the details of the plot and the narrative and the themes. So this is your only warning. If you haven't seen the film yet, if you don't want to get spoiled, click off now. This is a film that I was really looking forward to. I listed it as one of my most anticipated films of the year. Big fan of Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan and just their work together. I mean, I don't think these two have made a bad film together. Like, they're just gonna be one of those combos that get looked back on very fondly in the annals of film history. And I was really excited when it was announced that they were going to be making this film and playing within the horror genre. And I feel like with this film, you can definitely tell that they're fans of the horror genre. Like, they're definitely pulling in a lot of inspiration from classic horror films. I definitely saw a lot of inspiration from our friend John Carpenter. It is such a well-made, intentional piece of work. Michael B. Jordan is taking on the dual role here of playing these twins, Smoke and Stack, and as always, he does a really great job with the roles. I also had a lot of fun with the rest of the cast as well. This is a film that allows you to hang out with the characters before anything crazy starts happening, and I know that that's not everyone's cup of tea. I personally enjoy it. Like, I like when we can have films where we're just getting to know these people and getting to see them in their everyday lives. This film is getting a lot of comparisons to From Dusk Till Dawn, and I remember when I saw, I think, like the second trailer for the film, and it was in that second trailer where they were really highlighting the fact that it was going to be a vampire movie. And I remember at the time thinking, like, oh, is this going to be like a modern day From Dusk Till Dawn? Tonally, they're very different films, but you can definitely still see that influence in it, and I think you can definitely see the influence in the way that the story is structured, where the first part of the film, again, mostly character driven, some action stuff here and there, but you're really just getting to know the characters before any of the horror elements come in. And I think it works because the cast is a lot of fun and they all have these individual character quirks that do come into play when it is time to start fighting off the vampires. And I think it also works because each of these characters in the film are also serving as representations of various people at this specific time in history. This is a film that's taking place in the early 1930s in the Mississippi Delta. Obviously, a lot of stuff around segregation and Jim Crow happening at this time. And throughout the first part of the film and throughout learning about these characters, like, Ryan Coogler is giving you little pieces of historical information just about how people were living in this time and the detrimental effects of racism, oppression, how that impacts people on a spiritual scale, a psychological one, as well as economically. And within that, you're getting like a wide breadth of different personalities. You could tell there's a lot of care and research put into the movie and the characters. Aside from Michael B. Jordan, I would say my second favorite actor is Miles Canton, who plays Sammy, the cousin. especially the sequences where he's playing that guitar and he's singing, and he has such a beautiful, deep voice. We're going to talk more about the music in this film in a second, but I loved the scenes of him playing, and you can just tell when he's singing that there's a certain like freedom that this character is feeling, and how they use music to just break away from everything. Not only is it dealing with segregation, but it's also even dealing with his own personal family life of his father being part of the church, and how his father very much disapproves of him playing music, and this idea that playing music is just inviting the devil to come to you and inviting the devil into your life. And so you do feel for him as just this young man who really just wants to break away from all of these restrictions and just be able to experience life and live out his passions. Initially, while I was watching the film, I was surprised that it was taking a somewhat slower approach in the beginning. Like, you're really with the characters for like 1 hour before anything with the vampires really starts to happen. I was never bored by it, but there was a moment where I remember thinking like, okay, we're like already an hour into this movie. When are the vampires going to show up? When is the action going to start happening? Let's get some blood and guts going on here. But I think what's so beautiful about the movie and the way that it's constructed is that once you get to the end of it, it becomes much clearer why Ryan Coogler chose to have that slow start at the beginning and make it very character focused. And you have this series of vignettes of characters reconnecting with each other, especially the twins that Michael B. Jordan plays. Both of them have love interests that they had to abandon when they left Mississippi. And so there's a lot of reconnecting to their roots when they come back. And I think that's a very big piece of this film, and a very big piece of just the overall themes of it, is this connecting back to the past, and this idea that you can never really run away from your past no matter how hard you try. And also acknowledging that like your past is who you are, your heritage is who you are, your culture is who you are, and there's beauty in that, right? You're only where you're at today because of your ancestors and the ways that they had to fight to survive in order for you to be here right now, and the way that their customs and their stories and their songs gets passed on from generation to generation. And yes, it obviously expands throughout the years and new elements get added into it, but there's still like the seed of where that came from. And so the first part of the film is definitely supposed to be this homecoming and reconnecting to all of these aspects of their past, both the good and the bad. I think for me, where I really understood what the purpose of the first part of the film was is in that post-credit scene. There's a lot of post-credit stuff happening in this movie, but that first like post-credit scene where we're with older Sammy, and then you have vampire Stack and Mary who come back to visit him after all of these years, and they're just having this conversation, and Sammy says to them, I think about that night all the time and what we went through, but before that night happened, I had the best day of my life. And I feel like that bit of dialogue really solidified for me what Ryan Coogler was trying to do with the first part of this movie. There is the homecoming aspect to it, there is the historical aspect to it. It also allows the characters to have these moments of joy with each other, whether that's them driving together with a top down and they're playing music together, or just these very intimate moments between lovers. I think allowing the characters to have these small moments of joy are really important, again, when thinking about the larger themes of the film. And I think it asks the very uncomfortable question of how do you experience joy and love and laughter and music and creation when you're living in a time and a place where expressing those emotions could get you killed. The whole thing of them having to create this nightclub from scratch, where hopefully no nefarious person will come and stumble upon it and want to cause trouble. And so I think the film allowing us to see these moments of joy and happiness with these characters, however fleeting these moments are, was really important to just the overall emotional arc that the film takes you on. And there were times by the end of it where I was like tearing up and like getting really emotional. And I think that only works because of the character development that Coogler is putting a lot of time and effort into. And I know just from like briefly looking at comments online, like there are some people where there's kind of the arguments around like,
well, they should have just made it a historical film, like it's not really a horror film.
I respectfully disagree. I think the way that Ryan Coogler sets it up here works really well. And I think, yes, there is like the horror element of the vampires, and it's obviously borrowing from very traditional ideas of vampires, but I feel like the actual horror here is just this larger idea, and I think it is this idea that relates to the themes that we were just talking about around heritage and culture. And I think this feeling of disconnection that comes when you are living in an environment or in a time in which there is discrimination or just extreme hatred, and how this disconnection can lead to people trying to find connections in the wrong ways. And basically what I mean by that is someone coming in and seeing art or music from a culture that's not theirs and finding something about it that they enjoy or that connects with them, and trying to take that for themselves while ignoring where that art or that music or whatever that thing is originated from. Obviously, these ideas around like cultural appropriation have gotten very popular, especially within online discourse. And so this film was definitely exploring these ideas and doing it through blues music. I think that's where the real horror of this movie is coming from. It's this idea that something that is so close to you and your heritage could just be sucked away by someone else, and even worse, being sucked away by someone that ultimately just wants to hurt you in the end. And I mean, really, when you think about the figure of the vampire throughout history, right, going all the way back to Bram Stoker's Dracula, the vampire always was this aristocratic figure who kind of hovered above everyone else and found their prey in the lower classes. And yes, throughout the years, they've kind of moved away from that and have evolved into being more like sex symbols and, you know, sparkly vampires. But historically, they have always represented overall establishment who's really only interested in using people for their own gains. What I did think was really interesting about the vampires in this film is that they are Irish vampires, which again, thinking about the historical context of this time when you had Irish immigrants coming over to America, they were also very much discriminated against. And so I think they also are representing just this disconnection that a lot of these characters have of trying to live and survive and be in a world that doesn't want you or is actively telling you that your culture is bad, where you come from is bad. There's that disconnection. There's the disconnection of obviously being away from one's homeland, the disconnection around that like personal history, and just like how these Irish vampires are desperately searching for that. Like they're searching for a connection of some kind, and they see it in this group of people that they stumble upon, and they hear it in the music of these people. I think this is perfectly shown visually in just those two dancing sequences that we get in the film, where you have the scene in which Sammy is playing on the guitar and he's singing in the club, and it's that beautiful sequence where you have the narration coming in, and it's about how some music is so pure that it can just like penetrate time and space. And then there's this whole frenzy where the camera's going around the bar and you're seeing these figures from various places in time, whether that's the rock and roll guitar or the hip hop dancers, and just a very beautiful visual representation of the history of this genre, like where it came from, where its roots started, and then how it is going to continue to influence artists of various generations in the future. But again, going on these like themes of joy and connection and heritage, and just how that is so starkly different from then what you see with the Irish vampire when he's singing his song and all of the people that he's turned and all the people that are now part of his like vampire hive mind. Yes, they're all around him like singing and dancing, but there's not that sense of belonging, of connection that you had with that first sequence in the film, right? It's this very kind of disingenuous idea of like, yeah, we're all together, we're all one. And I thought it was really interesting that you had Stack get turned into a vampire and joining in this frenzy. And again, I think having Michael B. Jordan playing these two characters is really showing like the two sides of the same coin here, in which you have someone that is trying to stand their ground versus the person that is going to fall into that trap, or maybe representative of the person that is going to give away their identity and their culture for this like larger entity that seems like it wants to help them but doesn't really. And I also wondered too if Stack in that moment was also supposed to be representative of Ryan Coogler himself, and just the tensions, I think, of wanting to be an artist, wanting to be a filmmaker, wanting to tell your stories, but also having to do it in this system, in this industry that is run by people who most likely do not have an understanding of your background or the kind of themes that you want to explore in your film, but you also need to like be relying on these people to give you the resources to make the art that you want to make. I might be reading like way too much into this film, but for me that was something that I was thinking about when I was watching it and reflecting on these themes of like, yeah, as a filmmaker, how do you maintain that balance of integrity while also needing to appeal to the masses? I'm only bringing that up because I do think it plays into this larger meta narrative that you have with this film, where Ryan Coogler was actually able to get the rights to this movie. Like, it's distributed by Warner Brothers, but Warner Brothers does not own this film. Like, it shouldn't seem like this like big thing, but it is, just because a lot of artists do not own their work. A lot of creative work is owned by these bigger conglomerates. And I feel like Ryan Coogler is like one of the few directors that has gotten that opportunity. I know Quentin Tarantino, I think, owns a couple of his movies now. This is a discussion that you are seeing happening a lot more in the music industry. Although, again, I would argue that a lot of those conversations are happening for artists that are in significant positions of power, where they can kind of negotiate to get the rights for their music. I think it is a really interesting discussion, and again, very much playing into like these overall themes here around like who gets to take ownership of a piece of art, and also like who gets to control the narrative around that piece of art, and the narrative of how that piece of art was created, who it was created by, and who it was created for. Just a lot of really interesting, juicy themes here, which I love. I love this kind of stuff. Other things that I liked, I just wanted to touch upon. I also really loved the scene where they think that someone in the nightclub has turned into a vampire, and they're trying to figure out who it is. And so they like have everyone in the circle go around and just slowly eat a piece of garlic, and you're just kind of waiting to see like, okay, who's the vampire? Who is it? Who's gonna start like freaking out? Like, that was definitely giving The Thing vibes, right, when they're doing the blood test. And those are the kind of like homages that I love. I liked that you could tell what it was trying to give reference to. You could tell what it was giving a nod to, while still being its own thing and still being within the narrative of the film. Like, it made sense for that moment. And then just the cinematography overall. Oh my goodness, we cannot talk about this film without talking about the visuals. Right away when the film started, it was like a feast for my eyes. Like, my eyeballs were just like so happy to be looking at this movie and the gorgeous imagery that you see throughout. I know I'm gonna butcher her name, and I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names, but kudos to the cinematographer of this film, Autumn Durald's Akrapa. Yeah, her imagery in this was just chef's kiss. It was perfect. It was gorgeous. And you know what? We love seeing a badass woman behind the camera, and I loved the way that they played with the aspect ratios. I loved the way that it played with both traditional film as well as IMAX, because this film does have such large themes around the past and acknowledging the past and connecting to that. And Ryan Coogler, being such a film buff that he is, I wonder if him using these different types of technologies was meant to be like a conversation between the past and the present, like the old film cameras and the new ones. Again, I might be reading like way too much into this. Just that like scene when they invite the vampires to come into the club and they're getting ready to fight, and the aspect ratio just like gets larger. Like, how epic was that? How can you sit there and not think that was an epic moment? If I had to give like one critique, there was some narrative stuff that they set up that I kind of wish they had expanded upon. Mainly what I'm talking about is that there's a certain point in the film where you have these characters that are part of a local indigenous tribe that show up and are hunting for the vampire. And while I was watching it, I was like, okay, these people are gonna play like a larger role by the end of the film, like towards the big battle scene. And then no, they're not seen again. And I don't know, I would have been curious if they had like a larger role in the film. Again, I think Ryan Coogler does such a good job with the historical aspects of this movie. I would have liked if he had included more of the indigenous tribe in there and kind of what their relationship was to the vampire and why they were hunting it in the first place. But that's it. That's really like the only critique that I got for this film. I really enjoyed this movie a lot. So those are my overall thoughts on Sinners. Again, a very rich, full movie. If you've seen it, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I am going to try to see Until Dawn in the next couple of days and do a review on that as well. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.